Alright everyone, Marco Palmero, founder of Ulysses in Dubai, and welcome to another episode of Deal Reaction, where we talk about major acquisitions that are happening around the world, but also M&A updates and news. In this video, I want to discuss with you the big four accounting firms. Are they still the golden standard when it comes to M&A, due diligence, audit, and so forth? I want to do that because if you're watching this video at the end of 2024, you will certainly know that the Big Four have been involved in some scandal, if we want to call it this way, mostly on the audit side of things. If we talk about the Middle East in specific, there have been two cases they've been involved in, which I'm not going to mention, but you can Google them and you can find them easily. And I think these two cases made a lot of people wonder whether or not the Big Four are still, the place to go, the go-to firms when it comes to not only audit, but also mergers and acquisitions, due diligence, and many other things, many other services. So I will give you my perspective and I will tell you what I've learned after being in the Middle East for more than 3 years and interacting with different accounting firms and different teams. Because my perspective around M&A support back in the US was very different compared to what it is today. And back then, I used to believe that the Big Four were kind of like the golden standard, right? If you wanted to get the best possible support on the planet, you needed to go to one of these guys, to one of these Big Four accounting firms. As I came to the Middle East, I realized that it was a little bit different and things were not necessarily as I thought they would. The problem and the challenge was that, well, first of all, Big Four accounting firms used to leverage their own expertise and their own reputation worldwide in order to get clients, but not, they didn't necessarily have the same quality of service across different offices, in different locations. And what I happened to realize, especially here in the Middle East, is that in many cases, you can get the same quality, if not better quality of service going for second tier firms or even third tier, because what really matters in the Middle East is not the name, the reputation, or even the book knowledge that you have, but it is the on the ground experience, the the scar tissue that you've built in the Middle East. And I'm gonna dive a little bit deeper into this so that we can get a little bit more context around this. So let me give you this example. Back in the day, we were looking to negotiate a small transaction. It was a $20 million deal. But despite the fact that the deal was pretty small, we felt it was appropriate to engage somebody from the big firms, from the Big Four, to support us throughout the diligence, then audit, and throughout the process fundamentally. So we went there and we started interacting with them. And at the same time, we were going down a round of interviews, right? We were talking with other people and other firms. What I realized throughout that process was that the Big Four and the big firms were selling their reputation. They were not really selling their competence or their experience in the region, while other firms were leveraging their experience in the region to sell their services. And so there was this kind of like discrepancy between what one firm was doing in order to access clientele and what the other firm was doing. And based on my perception of the Middle East and also the advice of my partners, we decided to stick to the guys who actually had on the ground experience for doing deals, negotiating transactions, in also spotting issues, spotting red flags, and finding the skeletons. Because we felt that despite the name of a big firm could open up doors for you in many circumstances, the lack of on-the-ground experience can affect us throughout the process and might potentially compromise deals if we are not careful enough. And I think the interesting aspect about it is that, from a business deal perspective, having a due diligence report or quality of earnings report that is done by a big four accounting goes a long way, especially if you're raising external financing through banks, because they're going to look at this document and say, okay, a reputable firm did this. We're going to trust these numbers a lot more. The problem happens if the people at that firm are not necessarily as competent as they should be, and they don't have the experience on the ground, and therefore they put on paper something that is not necessarily accurate. That creates a discrepancy that might affect your own reputation if then a financial institution decides to provide you financing. So fundamentally, leveraging a name in order to get access to something might come back and bite you if there's no substance below that. And what I've learned, again, is that in many cases, it is better to go with somebody who's a little bit less reputable, but at least knows all the ins and outs of due diligence and business deals here in the region. Because one of the things that I found, and I'm sticking to this example to crystallize this idea, one of the things that I found is that many of the time, big four accounting firms will bring partners from other offices around the globe to support their teams here in the Middle East. Now, that is not the case 100% of the time, but in many cases it is, right? So you might engage with a partner that is from the UK, a partner that is from New York or stuff like that, and that is now spending part of his time and part of his career in the Middle East. Now, what is the problem with that when you're looking at it from a client perspective? Well, that this person might be the best possible individual, the best possible expert in this field, but he might not have all the experience that is needed here in the Middle East. So he might have only 2-3 years of experience doing deals in this part of the world. As a consequence, there will be a discrepancy between his expertise and his book knowledge, so to speak, and the on-the-ground experience that he possesses. And that will be affecting your deals, because invariably he's not going to be able to spot certain things. And even if he has a support team, because in most cases, associates and other people do the work, he's not going to be able to see if that work is actually done properly and if these people have looked where they needed to look in order to spot issues. And I found it to be a little bit different when you go with second or third tier accounting firms, because in most cases you will find that most of these people have spent their entire career in the Middle East or 10 years plus. And as a consequence, they have a much better understanding of what the business dynamics are in the region, and they can guide you through nuances and problems that might not necessarily be technical, so to speak, but there's still issues that you need to address in order to execute a deal properly. And so I'm trying to put it in a very nice way, but the point is there are gray areas in the Middle East that might not necessarily be gray areas in other parts of the world. And if somebody is not able to spot these issues and help you navigate these problems, you're going to end up in trouble. And it doesn't matter how big of a name they are, they're not going to be able to support you on certain things. Now, this is a big sign that I want to make a big disclaimer. Not all the people at the big four accounting firms are going to be inexperienced about the Middle East. And that's why I stress the concept of working with the person, not the firm. So the idea is when you do acquisitions in the Middle East, the trust should really go with the person, not with the name of the firm. And so if you happen to know somebody who's very good at what he does, that maybe is not at a big firm just because he decided to go in another direction, you might still decide to work with that individual because it's going to provide you with very good work. And it's all about the relationship with the individual and less of a positioning of the brand or the reputation of the firm. And I think that helped me a lot, because back in the day I was much more into names and, fancy letterheads, because I thought those could get me what I really wanted to get, which was the financing or the approval for a deal or stuff like that. But I ultimately came to the conclusion, after looking at many transactions and talking with a lot of financial advisors, that having the on-the-ground experience in the region goes a long way. Now, that still doesn't guarantee that you're going to be protected against all the issues. I'm not saying this, but certainly it's going to position you for success, and you're going to be able to see problems ahead of time. At least that has been my own personal experience dealing with these firms, repeatedly, really. And so, just to summarize, this kind of audit issues that are happening in the Middle East now made me question whether or not the Big Four are still this golden standard. From my perspective, in the Middle East, they're not. It's not really the name of the firm that determines whether or not you should go with somebody, but it is the competence of the individual and how many years he spent in this particular region. He might be the most competent person on earth, but he has only 12, 24 months experience in the Middle East. There are certain things he's not going to be able to find, and therefore you might want to go with somebody else. And ultimately, the individual itself is what really matters, at least from my perspective, and for based on the experiences that we had at Ulysses. So this is fundamentally it for this deal reaction, and I'll see you in the next one.